All right. Welcome back to the bench, everybody. Sam Windisch, Windisch Gunworks still. And we are continuing on. We just finished our thumb safety fitting, and now we're going to get into the heart of the gun with the trigger components. And I think this is kind of a good time for us to take a pause and talk about the components we put in the gun. I think this is kind of a broadly overlooked subject, but it's one that lots of people have some very, very opinionated ideas about. And I'm guilty of this too. There are certain parts that I absolutely will not use, and there are some parts that I really do prefer to use. Parts you're seeing on my bench right now are obviously parts that I prefer to use. Again, Harrison Design, can't say enough about them. Caspian makes great products. What do we got here? We got an Ed Brown Sierra Spring, great products. Can't say enough about those. Springs, ISMI, I use plenty of their springs, no problem with their springs whatsoever. Let's talk about why I prefer these products. The mainspring housing I bought from Stealth Arms because I wanted it to match the frame that we're using. So this is my first time ever using a Stealth Arms anything. And it's an aluminum mainspring housing, again, because this is a lightweight build, so I want to keep as much weight out of the gun as possible. If I'm only saving 1 ounce here, I get it, guys. Splitting hairs. But, just keeping with the things, the lines should all blend in the same. Stealth Arms brags about how well their parts all blend together. And it is true. The grip safety, once we get into that, you'll see it matches almost perfectly with the frame, which is awesome. Another first-time product use is a fusion trigger. Now, in the very first episode or second episode, I think it was the second episode, I actually pulled this out and kind of talked to you guys about this trigger. And why I wasn't spectacularly impressed by this trigger. It's very rough in texture. The metal has been media blasted. And for anybody who's done a trigger job and gone through and had to polish this is called the stirrup, and had to polish this out, you know that it's just a pain in the butt. The rougher this thing is, the more time you got to spend polishing this out. And the more time you got to spend on these things, and if you do this professionally, you're losing money. Time is money. Even if it's only 20 minutes, if you got to spend an extra 20 minutes polishing this thing out, this 20 minutes you could have been doing something else. Time is money, folks. I'll tell you a quick anecdotal story. I had a gentleman bring me a handgun wanting it to be rebuilt for USPSA competition use. He wanted a match barrel put in, match fit bushing, some ambidextrous thumb safety, a new big beaver tail, grip safety, oversized release. I told him that's actually, you can't do that in competition. Mag well fit, all these things. You wanted new sights, adjustable rear sight, fiber optic front, all this stuff to rebuild this pistol into a competition ready handgun. And he said, "Don't worry, I've got all the parts. You don't have to source any of the parts. I've got all the parts I want." And I said, "Okay, cool. Bring the gun in." He brings me the handgun. It's a Rock Island, and he brings me parts that I couldn't even tell you who the manufacturer was. And I look at him and I go, "How? If you don't mind me asking, how much did you spend on these parts?" He said, "Well, I got them really cheap. A couple of these, came off used from other guns, on the forums. I bought used parts from people that, had replaced parts, whatever." And I just look at him, I go, well, his thumb safety was new. The new beaver tail grip safety was new and unused. He understood that much. But the trigger had come out of a different gun. The sights had come off a different gun. The guide rod had come off a different gun, which normally isn't an issue, but just to kind of give you an idea here. And I look at the guy and I go, "I'm going to have to charge you an extra, 75 to $100 here, just because I have no idea what I'm working with." That, and it's a Rock Island. So I'm already assuming that the frame is way out of spec, which actually it happen to be out of spec. The gun works with itself, but when you start replacing parts on it with other parts, it doesn't want to work anymore. So you just kind of, I had to explain to him, why, a lot of pistol smiths and people don't like working with offshore 1911s. And not that there's anything bad with these companies. They're great companies. They support us. They, sell handguns, so they import handguns to us here in America. They, vehemently support our Second Amendment right, which is great. But there's a place for items in the market like that. And I'm not quite sure that a full-blown competition race gun is where some of those brands really belong. So sorry, getting off track there. Again, nothing against Rock Island. They're a fantastic company. But there are some inevitabilities that we do have to discuss when we're talking about companies like that. If he had brought a Springfield loaded or something like that, not a problem at all. I can get it done faster, which means I can charge him less, if that makes sense. So when I look at a part like this and I see how rough this is, and I look at the rest of the texture of this, this is an aluminum trigger, it's not steel. And the aluminum is media blasted to look like media blasted steel, okay? Which is good that it's aluminum, it's lightweight. I mean, the lighter trigger means it can move faster and cleaner, and you get a better feel, a better response from the trigger finger when you're shooting. It's got all the right things on there. It's got little adjustment wings on it. It's got the adjustment screw right there for pre-travel and over-travel. So once we get it fit up and everything, it should work just great. I would like to point out that this trigger does drop in. And that is kind of a peeve to me. I want my triggers to not drop in automatically. Now, Fusion cuts their stuff as tight to actual spec and tolerance as possible. And I'll give them credit for this, okay? This trigger has a very nice fit for being a drop-in trigger. It's not overly loose. There is a little play. Okay, a little side-to-side play and a little up and down play. But not much. So I will give them kudos for that. But if you buy a Caspian trigger or an STI trigger or an SVI trigger, this trigger, the actual shoe itself, is not going to fit in that trigger slot. 99%. It's going to be too tall, and you're probably going to 99%. You're going to have to fit the top of that trigger to slide in. Okay, and that's to ensure that you can get as tight of a sliding fit as possible without it being loose and wobbling around. Okay, so the more trigger wobbles around, and I'm exaggerating this, trigger's never going to wobble like that inside of a gun. But the more it's allowed to wobble around, the more variables we are introducing into how the back right here is going to press against the disconnector, which then re-engages the safety. Hold on. All right, slight 6-year-old interruption. So back at it. Totally forgot where the heck I was, except fitting the pad here. So again, this is a good trigger for a hobbyist. And for what we're doing here, for the cost, I want to say this was about $20. Not bad at all. For $20, I'll say you're getting your money's worth. You're getting a fully adjustable trigger. You're going to spend a little bit more time polishing out these surfaces. But at the same time, you don't have to spend that time fitting the top of the trigger, because it is just sliding right in. So, for $20, you're still buying an American-made part. Made here in America. Fusion Firearms is down in Florida. So, take it for what it's worth. If you want the super high-quality match fit trigger with zero slop in it, you're going to buy something else. If you want something a little bit easier to on the fitting side, but you're willing to put in some more time on the polishing side, yeah, hey, here you go. So this is not a competition gun. This isn't a bullseye gun. This is purely a recreational gun that my wife will take to the range every now and then and have fun with. that doesn't mean we're going to skimp out on stuff. We're still going to make it a absolutely phenomenal firearm, because my name is going on this, and the Windisch Gunworks name is goes on everything I make. So it's going to be made to the best of our abilities. But this isn't a bullseye gun, so we don't need a 2.5 pound, 2 pound, ultra crisp trigger. Man, that's where I was. So yeah, trigger's wobbling around. Sorry to backtrack here, but I do want to explain this. The more trigger wobbles, the more variables are introduced with how this portion of the back of the stirrup right here interfaces with the disconnector, which then rotates the sear, or engages the sear and pushes the sear and disengages the sear out of the hammer hooks. So the more that this plays around, the more inconsistent that trigger break is going to be, and you can end up side loading it either way with your trigger. Again, these are all gross exaggerations, but just for illustrative purposes, you can side load with your finger based on how you place your finger on the trigger, and all that. The reason for having this thing in there, super tight and just for a sliding fit, is that you take away all those variables and you get a consistent trigger. So for competition guns, that is extremely important to have an extremely consistent braking trigger when you're shooting one-handed, at 50 yards rapid fire. Okay, for like the NRA bullseye, EIC matches, and stuff like that. Is this going to be a bullseye NRA style trigger at the end of the day? Probably not, but we're still going to make it freaking awesome. Okay, so enough about that. Sear spring, I'll be honest with you, I really haven't ran into a bad one. I will say that the only real differences I've seen in these is how stiff they are, and how smooth and polished they will come from the factory. So this is an Ed Brown spring, and I've come to like these. They've got a good, all these springs should be heat treated. Excuse me. All these springs should be heat treated. Spring steel is not your average steel. These aren't just like, it's not just sheet metal that's stamped out and bent. Okay, spring steel is a different composition, and it's heat treated differently to have resistance. It should have a temper on it, so that it springs back into its position. Okay, now spring steel can be bent around to kind of get you the resistance and the bends that you want, but if you take it too far, you're going to ruin the spring, and it'll lose its spring-like properties. Same with if you try to, I don't know why you would do this, but if you ever heard about heating steel up and ruining the temper, never ever do that with a leaf spring. You'll take the springiness out of the spring, and then it really will just be sheet metal. You definitely don't want that. So when we get into this, we're going to be polishing some points up here, all the contact points, specifically this middle finger right here, this edge right here. This is what presses up against your grip safety. This is what's going to re-engage your disconnector, and this is pressing up against your sear. Okay, so we're going to polish these up just to remove any friction between these parts, and it helps keep our trigger nice and smooth and light and crisp. Okay, but yeah, as far as brands go, I would stick with American made. Well-known brands. These things are cheap. And you bend them to shape. So it's not like there's really a spec. As long as they're, they got the right little hook down here that hooks in. And oops. Now I'm fumble fingers. I'm only fumble fingers in front of you guys. Jeez. It's actually easier when I have a trigger in there. There you go. So as long as it hooks down in there and it's in there, you're probably gonna be all right. Okay. Yeah, let's just go into pins. This again, first time Fusion pin kit buyer. The kit, this kit was cheap. I want to say it was like $12 or less. Maybe it was 15. But this was supposed to be an all stainless kit, stainless pins. The mainspring housing retaining pin is blued. So I don't know. Am I gonna make that big of a fuss about it? No, it's on the inside of the gun and you don't see it. But I mean, you know, draw your own conclusions, okay? These pins should be hardened, whether they're stainless or whether they are carbon steel. If they are carbon steel, it is likely 4140, which is it's a medium carbon steel and it can harden up quite nicely. If they're stainless, they should be 416. 416 is a hardenable stainless steel. Oops. Is a hardenable stainless steel, and that's why it's used in firearms so much. Because it's not a 300 series stainless, which it can be hardened, but the process is different and not as conducive to firearms and hardening. Okay, so 416, the 400 series, 440, you see 440 used in knives, stuff like that, because it can be hardened and become very durable. So these should be hardened. You can test that on your own. So the pins that we're going to need today for what we're doing here, we've got our hammer and our sear spring right here. Then we've got our cup and our other little guy for our mainspring housing. We've got the little retaining pin for the mainspring housing, and then the teeny little guy, which is our hammer pin that's going into oh my gosh, read the dang name of it. The strut, the hammer strut. Oh my gosh, I need some more coffee. This is probably the only pin set that I've used that I'll probably never buy again. And not that I don't think these pins are going to work. That one little blued pin is just kind of annoying to me. So yeah, I don't know. Again, draw your own conclusions. Most pin sets that you buy are going to be between 15 and 15 bucks, right around there. So they're not super expensive. If I was really super being nitpicky about this build, I would just scrap it, and I'd go get like a Ed Brown pin set or something like that. Not a huge deal to me though, but it is just annoying. So the hammer strut, again, I haven't used one that hasn't worked. But again, these parts need to be within spec and within tolerance, so I go with trusted names. One thing I do look for in a hammer strut, to see if I'm ever going to use it again, is when I look at the bottom, I look, is it straight, or is it bent, is it curved, is it rounded? Okay, is it round, or is it still square? And then the very tip, I look at the very tip to see, is it squared off or is it rounded? And the reason I want it to be rounded is because this is where it engages to, and I need it to be able to go back and forth freely. I don't need it getting hung up. I mean, this is actually another polishing point. If you feel like a gritty feeling when you manually cock the hammer in your pistol, this is a place to look. Polish off the bottom of this, polish the inside of that, and you might get rid of some of that grit, because these parts do engage with each other and they do pivot. They do pivot inside this cup, okay? So that's something I look for. Caspian does a nice job of leaving a nice rounded end. STI, I believe it's STI, makes a titanium one. So if you want a really fast lockup, like when I do match guns and bullseye guns, I'll put a titanium hammer strut in. That's a decreased lock time. So from the time the hammer is released to the time the cartridge is actually detonated and fired, we want that time to be as fast as possible. Milliseconds, faster than milliseconds. And so this steel part, compared to a titanium part, is heavy, especially when we're talking about spring pressures and forces moving mass and stuff like that. But yeah, this is more of a defensive style build, excuse me, and we don't need that. But yeah, Caspian, great brand to go with for a hammer strut. They work just fine. ISMI springs, again, a Wolf springs just fine. Colt, if you want to buy a Colt spring, I really haven't ran into springs that I didn't like. You'll see a couple different types of springs out there: chrome silica, stainless steel springs. There's some other, yeah, I call boutique springs, you know, being like your flat wound springs or your double wound springs. Guys, just stick with the standard springs and you're gonna be okay. All right. So I use ISMI just because it's kind of what I've always used and they work great. The actual hammer, sear, and disconnector itself. This is almost like an advertising series for Harrison Design. But this is a brand that I've come to really trust and like. So we're going to take these out so I can kind of show you guys why I like these ones so much. Okay. So here we go. This is really what makes a 1911 a 1911 right here. Those three parts: the hammer, the sear, and the disconnector. Let me get that center frame there. Oh man, battery's dying. Okay. The first thing I want to know about an ignition kit, if I'm going to buy a new ignition kit, if I'm looking at a new company to buy from, I want to know, are they through hardened? Are these parts through hardened when they're heat treated? Why is that important? Isn't hardening just hardening and heat treating? Well, no, it's not. And this is one of the biggest reasons I will not use trigger kits from offshore companies. The parts have to be through hardened. This needs to be tool steel, and it needs to be hardened all the way through. When people cheap out, like this is not a cheap ignition kit. Those three parts right there will cost well over $100. Okay, $130, $150, something like that. And this is why. Okay, these are hardened tool steel. They are ground into spec. You're going to have no problems with these parts for the life of the pistol. These parts will work for life, guaranteed. Now, when you buy trigger parts that come in a little plastic bag with no name on them, and they're covered in oil, and it smells like a shrimp ramen packet when you open it up, guarantee you those parts are not through hardened. Guarantee you it might be like some medium carbon, like 4140 or something like that, which is just fine for other parts, but not for trigger components. And they're going to be hardened, but only on the outside, which means it's not case hardening, but they're not going to be through hardened, which means they were simply heated up till they were red hot. They lost their magnetism and then quenched. And that works for some things, but not on a part that's going to have hard use and friction on it its entire life, like trigger components. When you do your trigger job, you can very easily with these files get right through the hardened layer, if these aren't through hardened, and into soft steel. And then from there, I mean, you got soft steel rubbing on potentially another hardened part, and it's going to continue to wear. And now you're running the risk of pulling the trigger and your gun going fully automatic on you unintentionally at the range and having a runaway handgun on you, which is not cool, because now you have an unsafe handgun because we wanted to skimp out and save money on trigger components. The key points here that are going to wear are the edge of the sear right here against your hammer hooks right there. Okay, once and you know, we're talking about 20 thousandths of material, 20 to 30 thousandths ledge right here that's engaging against your sear. Okay, that's it. That's all the material you got to keep this handgun from going crazy. And if you're going to trust that to shrimp ramen packets, you know, I don't know. That's on you, brother. But you know, this is why there are only certain companies, certain names that I'm going to use. Okay, and you can see the surface finish on the metal. All right, you know, when you open these things up, you'll see the care that these companies put into their product. When you open it up, and I'm looking at the disconnector right here, this is the part that sticks up from your frame, and this is all polished out. This is a mirror finish. I don't know if you guys can see that thing shining, okay, but this is polished out, full mirror finish right here, and it needs to be because the slide is riding over top of this thing, going up and down inside the frame. Look down here on the pad, not as polished. It does have a slight media blast on it, but we're going to repolish that up. Not a huge deal. It takes 5 minutes. It does have a very nice finish on it, so it's going to polish up very fast. Okay. If we come back to the hammer again, if you look right here on this face, this is where the sear is going to live. Mirror polish finish. Okay, the hammer hooks, mirror polish. Your safety hooks, okay, this is your secondary safety hooks in case the hammer does slip off. It captures the sear, or it captures on the sear. Right here in the sledge, it doesn't need to be polished, has nothing to do with the trigger pull. But right here should be polished, and it is. This is a mirror polish, which is excellent to see. You see the sides of the hammer are these are surface ground. Okay, so if you don't know what a surface grinder is, this is a big industrial grinding machine that grinds things exceedingly flat, and you can get a really fantastic surface finish depending on what type of grinding wheel you got in there. So both surfaces right here, the part that's actually going to reside inside the frame and outside the frame are surface ground to a very nice finish. And you can just tell the company puts a lot of effort into making their parts look fantastic. As well as function really well. Okay, you see you got a little laser etch there. They put their logo on their part. You know, shrimp ramen packets ain't putting their logo with a laser etch on their parts. Okay. Again, moving to the sear. This right here, this pad right here is the surface where the thumb safety will engage. Okay. So that needs to be that needs to be smooth, okay, so that we don't have friction when we're binding there. The edge of the sear nose, okay, this is called the sear nose, should be polished. It is mirror polished, okay, and this is a true radius sear from Harrison Design. So we'll talk about what that means, but there's not really the secondary bevel on there. It's a radius surface, radius coming from measured from the center of the hole right here. It's axis of pivot. Okay, it's the same radius extending out from the center of that. This should be polished, and it is. The rest of this, it looks excellent. Again, sides are surface ground. The rest of the lines are very clean and sharp. So it's very pleasing. Everything that should be polished is polished. There's only one part on here that I'm going to polish that isn't, and that's just that pad right there. And most companies don't polish that. I think Extreme Engineering might come with them polished. And again, Extreme Engineering, you're going to pay $130 to $150 for their trigger kits. Same as Harrison Design. But that's what I'm looking for in a trigger kit, an ignition kit. When I buy these parts, you got to understand that if you start with great components, you're going to end up with a fantastic product at the end of the day. If you start with so-so components, yeah, you might be able to get a good result at the end, but how long is it going to last? Hardened steel, working against hardened steel isn't going to wear. Yes, okay, technically it wears like microns, yes. But once you wear through the hardened layer on cheaper parts, you're getting into softer steel. That part is now junk. It should not be considered safe to use in a firearm. All right, sorry, batteries right about to die. I'm just going to wrap this up real quick before I change the batteries. But that's why I use components like this, okay? Cylinder and Slide, another great company you can use. Wilson Combat Bulletproof series. Those are the ones you want to use. Anything from Ed Brown, Les Bear, the Caspian is fine. EGW, great products. I've used probably almost all of those. I'd have to go back and see specifically which ones I haven't used, but yeah, EGW, again, Harrison Design, Extreme Engineering, Cylinder Slide, all those guys, the big names, the trusted names, those are all the ones that are using properly heat-treated ignition components, and those are components that are going to last you the rest of the life of the gun, guaranteed. Okay, so I'm going to change this battery out, and we'll be right back. All right, and we're back from our little battery change. Also, a couple hours later, and a little interruption earlier was the Princess. I had promised we were going to make a little birdhouse today with some popsicle sticks, so we got some project craft time drying here off to the side. Okay, so starting with putting our trigger together, the first thing we're going to do is assemble the mainspring housing. So out of the pin kit, we got a couple pieces. So let's start putting this thing together. Go. Okay, I guess I should explain this, right? So if this is your first time putting one together and you really don't know what's going on, okay, so your little pointed piece just goes in your spring. That goes down in there, and then the cupped portion faces up, okay? Now the next part is, it can be frustrating at times. You're gonna need your little retaining pin. This is kind of where a third hand comes in handy. If this thing was steel, I would probably put it in my vise and do this. But what I'm about to do is take the retaining pin. I just kind of start it in the hole. Okay, and I'm going to use my punch. I'm going to push this down until we clear the retaining pin, and then slide the retaining pin over it to capture everything. Get this going in there. Sometimes this can be a little, come on. There we go. Remember, that retaining pin goes in from the back, okay? So the back will have like a little countersink in the back for it, and that's how you know it goes in that way. You don't put it in from the front, okay? So there we go. We got our assembled mainspring housing. So now we got our hammer pin, or man, I'm all over the place today. Our hammer spring, or mainspring. Okay, in there, and again, we're using a 19-pound spring on this project. Want a little bit of a heavier trigger pull, probably around 4 to 4.5 pounds. So next, before we can start installing parts to see how our initial fit is going to be, we need to connect our hammer to our hammer strut. We're going to break out our handy dandy bench block for that. You don't have to use a bench block for this. You can just do it straight on any old workbench. Okay. But I like to do it on here so I don't ding up my my bench too bad. Okay. Now, the orientation, again, for the first timers out there. Okay. So your hammer sits in your frame. Okay, like this, like so. Your hammer strut is sitting in your gun like this, or approximately, okay? So that's the orientation that you're going to pin the two together in, okay? Not this way, all right? This way, with it hooking away, well, with the curve in there, but hooking away from the gun, okay? So we're going to take our smallest little pin, this one can be a bear if you got fat fingers. Come on. Sometimes it pays to just kind of start this guy. And I made this tool, I think I showed it earlier, but it has a secondary use. So when I made this, I put I center drilled it, and it just coincidentally happens to fit like perfectly over these little pins that are like hard to start when you're a fumble fingers like me. And so it just cups on there. Yeah, see it? I guess it only works if you can even get it to stand up on there, right? But just kind of use it to hold that pin. Just like that, just to get it started. Come on. These are this is a friction fit hole, so you know
It's definitely not a drop in. You gotta bash the thing in there. Oh, come on. I should magnetize the tip of this thing, huh? Might make that pin want to stay in there. This pin and the link pin, probably the two most frustrating pins to put in the gun. Alright, here we go. Round two. Like that. That's crooked. I don't want to go in. Alright, here we go. We'll come back when it's in. Aha, success. Just needed a little persuasion in the right direction. So, we've got it just sticking out from the other side. Might actually have to back this out. But basically what you want to do is just kind of tap it around or tap it in gently, so to speak. In fact, I will tap it out just a little bit. Until it just kind of catches the hammer strap. Yeah, there we go. Okay, that should work. Okay. Well, it's not just catching, but we'll get it. Pull it stranger here. Hammering with the left hand. We don't want that pin sticking out and rubbing on the inside of your frame as the hammer's working back and forth. That's not good. Okay, so we're good. We're in there, and we can start assembling our trigger. So if you are unfamiliar, again, we'll do kind of like a little demo here. Yeah. Okay. So that's what's nice about this 10/8 block that has the proper pins and stuff in it. Okay, so here's your hammer, and then your disconnector. It's gonna sit. Well, let's get everything in the right orientation. Your sear slides over your disconnector. It straddles it. Okay, so it's split in the middle, straddles it right over the big old square hole, and the sear pin is gonna go through. Oops. Whoa. It's gonna go through both. Okay. Sear pin goes through both. And this, whoop, get on the proper hooks there. Okay, and that is the orientation of your parts. So we'll zoom in and we'll kind of show how they work and why a trigger job does what it does. Okay, so we're all zoomed in, and this is what your trigger components look like inside your gun in the cocked and ready position. Well, I guess the strut would be down like that. Okay, your trigger is sitting right here. And you'll notice, okay, I'm gonna try not to touch these parts here, so I don't change their location. Okay. As you see right here at the bottom of the disconnector, this pad is touching the rear portion of the sear itself. This is your sear. Okay, the half moon looking like piece. So the trigger itself does not actually interact with the sear. Okay. What happens when you break a shot is finger on the bang switch, okay, you press the trigger straight to the rear, and the trigger interacts with that pad, pushes it back. All right. Now keep in mind this would be captured up here in the frame. So when we push it to the rear, it can rotate a little bit. Okay. So that moves forward, that presses against the back of this portion of the sear here, rotating the nose of the sear out of the way of the hammer hooks of the hammer in which it is captured to right here. Now the hammer is free to swing forward, bang. okay, and it is powered forward from the hammer strut. The hammer strut is pressing up against, you can call it a piston in there, which has our mainspring, okay, which is sitting like this in the grip below it, okay. So sear nose comes free of the hammer. The spring down here in the mainspring housing powers the piston up, which in turn cams the hammer forward, striking your firing pin, stopping against the firing pin stop, and detonating your cartridge. Okay, slide comes back in recoil, pushes the disconnector down. Okay, pushes the hammer back, obviously. And we have spring tension from the 3 leaf springs, okay, pushing the sear nose back forward to re-engage into the hammer hooks. Sorry, I'm trying to do this without messing up the orientation of everything at once. Okay, the disconnector is pushed back into position by its spring. And as the hammer comes back forward, the disconnector pops back up into its hole and recaptures the sear back where it was, and we're ready to do the process again. All right, so that's the orientation of your parts inside the gun. If you didn't really understand what was going on, hopefully that explained a little bit to you, so you have a better understanding of when we're talking about the geometry of the sear nose and the hammer hooks, why that's so important, and when we start talking about secondary angles, secondary bevels, and things like that, where those surfaces come into play when I start drawing them on the whiteboard for you.